I used to believe the walls of my apartment were the only company I needed. They were predictable. They were silent. They held the shape of my life, a neat and tidy container for a quiet existence. Then my neighbor, Officer Marcus Thorne, started using my couch as a confessional, and all those quiet, predictable walls began to feel like a cage. My life was a series of carefully curated routines. Coffee at 7. Work on my drafting table until noon. Lunch a walk, more work. Dinner alone. The city hummed outside my window, a beast I kept at a safe distance. I was a cartographer of fictional worlds, drawing maps for novels, and my own world was a single, well-defended acre of solitude. Marcus Thorne was a disruption long before he ever spoke a word to me. He lived in 4B, directly across the hall. I lived in 4A. Our doors faced each other like two unblinking eyes. He was a cop. I knew this from the imposing shape of his cruiser in the parking lot and the starchy, dark blue uniform he wore like a second skin. He was big, not just tall, but broad, a solid wall of a man who moved with a kind of weary authority that made the floorboards in the hallway creak a little deeper. I saw him mostly in glimpses, a flash of blue in the periphery as I fumbled for my keys. The heavy, rhythmic tread of his boots ascending the stairs when the elevator was broken. The low murmur of his voice through the door, always clipped and final. From my window, which overlooked the parking lot, I had a clearer view. I watched him leave in the dark of the early morning and return long after the sun had set. He would sit in his car for long minutes, the engine off, the cab dark, just a silhouette against the sodium vapor lights of the lot. A statue of a man, gathering or shedding the weight of his day. I decided he was arrogant. It was easier that way. The set of his jaw was too firm. The way he never made eye contact in the hall felt like a dismissal. He was a man of action, of loud noises and harsh realities. I was a man of quiet lines and imagined landscapes. We were different species. The distance between us was the 30 feet of worn floral carpet in the hallway. It might as well have been a chasm. He represented a world that terrified me, a world of conflict and consequence. I represented a world he likely didn't even know existed, a world of silence and ink. My observations were my secret, a one-sided, silent conversation. I noticed the way the fabric of his uniform strained across his shoulders. I noticed the exhaustion that seemed permanently etched in the corners of his eyes. I noticed that for all his perceived arrogance, he always held the main door for old Mr. Henderson from 2C. He was a contradiction I couldn't map, a territory without a key or a scale. So I kept my distance, content to observe from the safety of my fortress. Solitude was a habit I had mistaken for a preference. Then came the storm. It wasn't just a storm, it was an assault. The sky turned a bruised purple-gray, and the wind began to howl, a living thing clawing at my windows. The rain came not in sheets, but in torrents, a solid wall of water that blurred the world outside into an impressionist nightmare. My routine was the first casualty. The power flickered, then died with a groan, plunging my apartment into a disorienting twilight. The hum of the refrigerator, the buzz of my computer, the white noise of my life, all gone, replaced by the roar of the wind and the percussive drumming of rain against glass. I lit candles. Their small, dancing flames threw monstrous shadows on the walls, turning my familiar space into something alien. My heart, a frantic bird, beat against my ribs. I hated storms. I hated the loss of control, the raw, untamable power of them. I was standing by the window, watching the streetlights drown when I saw it. A massive oak branch, ancient and heavy, torn from its trunk by a vicious gust. It cartwheeled through the air in a terrifying slow motion before crashing down, right onto the roof of the west wing of our building. There was a sound like the world splitting open, a crunch of wood and shingles, followed by the tinkle of shattering glass. My own window rattled in its frame. The crash was followed by a new sound, the sound of shouting. My building, his side of the building, 4B, panic cold and sharp, pierced through my storm-induced anxiety. Before I could process it, before I could convince myself to stay put, to mind my own business, there was a pounding on my door. Not a knock. A heavy, urgent fist. It was him. I knew it was him. No one else in the building knocked like they were trying to break the door down. I opened it a crack, the security chain still on. Marcus Thorne stood there, drenched. Rainwater streamed from his hair, plastered it to his forehead. His uniform was soaked through, clinging to his chest and shoulders. But it wasn't the rain that held my attention. It was the frantic, wild look in his eyes. The confident cop was gone. This was just a man in a storm. "The branch came through my window," he said, his voice rough, louder than necessary to be heard over the wind. "The whole ceiling is coming down. I need—" He trailed off, looking past me into the warm, flickering candlelight of my apartment. He looked lost. My carefully constructed solitude shattered. The storm wasn't just outside anymore. It was in my hallway. It was standing on my welcome mat, and it was asking for shelter. I fumbled with the chain, my fingers clumsy. "Come in," I said, my voice barely a whisper. He stepped inside, and my small apartment seemed to shrink by half. He brought the storm in with him, the smell of rain and ozone and cold night air. He dripped onto my hardwood floors, creating a dark, spreading puddle at his feet, a puddle that marked the breach of my defenses. For a long moment, we just stood there, me clutching the doorknob, him standing in the middle of my living room, looking utterly displaced. The silence between us was thick, broken only by the howl of the wind outside. This was no longer Officer Thorne, the intimidating neighbor. This was Marcus, a man whose home had just been broken by the sky. He ran a hand through his wet hair, shaking his head as if to clear it. To just show up. I didn't know where else to go. The admission hung in the air. A crack in the armor. I found my voice. "It's fine. Are you hurt?" "No, just wet." He looked down at his soaked uniform, at the puddle he was making. A flicker of something, embarrassment, crossed his face. "I'm making a mess, don't worry about it," I said, the words automatic. I moved, finally, breaking the strange tableau. I grabbed a towel from the linen closet. "Here." He took it, his fingers brushing mine. It was nothing, a fleeting accidental contact, but it felt like a jolt of electricity, a static charge in the storm-filled air. My breath hitched. I felt a sudden, inexplicable heat flash across my skin. I pulled my hand back as if burned. Did he feel it? I sneaked a glance at his face. He was just rubbing the towel over his head, oblivious. Of course he was. It was just me. It was always just me. "I've got some old sweats and a t-shirt you can borrow," I offered, needing to fill the silence, needing to stop my own racing thoughts. "They'll probably be too small, but they're dry." He nodded, a gesture of pure exhaustion. "Thanks." I led him to my small bedroom, leaving him to change while I went to the kitchen. My hand was shaking as I poured 2 glasses of water. The apartment felt charged, occupied. His presence was a physical weight, a low hum that vibrated through the floorboards. He was too large for my space, too real for my quiet, ink and paper world. We came back into the living room. The transformation was jarring. He was wearing my gray sweatpants, which were comically short on him, ending mid-calf. My old college t-shirt was stretched tight across his chest, defining the hard planes of muscle underneath. The uniform was a shield, a costume. This was the man beneath it. And up close, without the armor, I saw things I'd never noticed from my window. A faint, silvery scar that cut through his left eyebrow. The spray of fine lines around his eyes, etched there by fatigue, or maybe laughter, I couldn't tell. His hands, which I'd only ever seen holding a steering wheel or a coffee cup, were calloused and marked with small, faded cuts. The hands of someone who did more than just exist in the world. He engaged with it, fought with it. He looked profoundly tired, the kind of tired that sinks into the bones. He sank onto my couch, not with a cop's rigid posture, but with a deep, weary sigh, his broad shoulders slumping. He looked vulnerable, and that vulnerability was more intimidating than any amount of perceived arrogance had ever been. "Power's going to be out for a while," he said, staring into the flame of a candle on the coffee table. "Whole grid is down on this side of town, I figured," I replied, sitting in the armchair opposite him. The distance felt both too far and not nearly far enough. "You can stay here." On the couch, he looked up at me then, his gaze direct for the first time. His eyes were a startlingly clear shade of hazel, flecked with green and gold in the candlelight. "You don't have to do that. Where else are you going to go?" I countered, a flicker of my usual defensiveness rising. "Back to your apartment, with the tree in it." A ghost of a smile touched his lips. It changed his entire face, softening the hard lines. "Good point." He leaned back, resting his head against the cushions. "Thanks." Leo, he knew my name. I don't know why that surprised me, but it did. It felt like he'd reached across that chasm between us and pulled me a little closer to his side. The power dynamic had completely inverted. Here, in my home, surrounded by my books and my drawings, I was the one in control. He was the one in need. I was the one offering shelter, and he was the one accepting it. It was a strange, unsettling feeling. The playing field, which had always seemed so tilted in his favor, was suddenly level. We sat in silence for a while, listening to the storm rage outside. It was a comfortable silence, surprisingly. Not the awkward, tense quiet of a hallway. This was a shared stillness, a truce. "You hate storms," he stated, not as a question. I flinched. "Is it that obvious? You keep checking the windows, and you're holding that water glass like you're trying to crush it." He gestured with his chin. I looked down. My knuckles were white. I forced my hand to relax. "Yeah," I admitted. "I don't like them." "Me neither," he said, so quietly I almost didn't hear him over a gust of wind. "Too much chaos. Can't control it." That small confession was another chip in the armor. The strong, silent cop didn't like storms. He didn't like chaos. Suddenly, he seemed infinitely more human. A man who craved order, just like me, but whose job forced him to live in the heart of disorder every single day. Later, I made up the couch for him with blankets and a pillow. He stood, stretching, and again I was struck by his sheer physicality. He moved with an economy of motion, a coiled energy that seemed barely contained even in exhaustion. "This is really nice of you," he said, his voice low and rough with fatigue. "I appreciate it. It's nothing," I mumbled, avoiding his eyes, focusing on smoothing a non-existent wrinkle in the blanket. "Get some sleep." I retreated to my bedroom and closed the door, but I couldn't sleep. I could hear him on the other side of the wall, the soft sigh as he lay down, the shifting of his weight on the cushions. My entire apartment felt different, charged with his presence. The quiet I cherished was gone, replaced by the quiet awareness of another person breathing just a few feet away. My solitude had been breached, and the most terrifying part was I wasn't sure I wanted it back. The storm passed in the night. The next morning, the power was still out, but the world was washed clean, unnaturally quiet. I found Marcus in the kitchen, peering into my empty, non-functional coffee maker with a look of profound despair. "Morning," I said. He turned, and a real, genuine smile lit his face. "Morning. I would kill for a cup of coffee right now. I have a French press," I said, "and a gas stove." One of the perks of an old building. His expression was one of pure, unadulterated relief. "Leo, you might be my new favorite person." The casual intimacy of the comment sent a ridiculous flutter through my chest. I busied myself with grinding beans by hand, the repetitive motion a comfort. He leaned against the counter, watching me, his arms crossed over his chest. The t-shirt strained again. I tried very hard not to stare. "So," he said, breaking the silence. "You draw maps." He gestured to the proofs tacked to the corkboard on my wall. "Something like that," I confirmed. "For fantasy novels. I draw the worlds people get lost in, huh?" He considered this for a moment. "So you make order out of chaos, too. Just a different kind. I'd never thought of it that way." I looked at him, really looked at him in the clear morning light. The exhaustion was still there, but so was a flicker of curiosity. He was seeing me, not just as the quiet guy from 4A, but as a person. The storm was the inciting incident, but this was the turning point. After the power was restored and he moved back into his now-repaired apartment, the hallway between us no longer felt like a chasm. It was just a hallway. The nods became, "Hey," the haze became, "How's it going?" And then, one night, about a week later, there was a knock on my door. Soft this time. Hesitant. It was Marcus. He was in his uniform, just home from shift. The armor was back in place, but I could see the cracks. He held up a six-pack of beer. Had a rough one, he said, his voice flat. I know it's weird, but your place was quiet. I was wondering if I could just sit for a bit. Think he needed my silence. The thing I had built my life around, the thing I used as a shield, was something he sought out as a refuge. How could I say no? So it began. A new routine. Once or twice a week, he'd knock on my door after a long shift. He'd bring beer or takeout. He wouldn't talk much at first. He'd just sit on my couch, nursing a bottle, the silence of my apartment seeming to physically soothe him, to leach the tension from his shoulders. He started to talk, eventually, in fragments, not about the details of his day. He never broke that professional wall, but about the weight of it, the frustration, the feeling of seeing the worst parts of the city, the worst parts of people, day in and day out. My couch became his confessional, my living room his sanctuary, and I became his listener. I rarely offered advice. I just listened and watched the hard lines of his face soften, watched the guardedness in his eyes recede, just for a few hours. I was falling for him. It was a slow, terrifying, inevitable descent. Every time he showed up at my door, my heart did a painful little flip. Every time he smiled that rare, genuine smile, it felt like the sun coming out. I was a cartographer, and he was becoming the center of my map, the point from which all other landmarks were measured. One night, he showed up later than usual. He looked wrecked. There was a darkness in his eyes I'd never seen before, a haunted look that went beyond simple fatigue. He didn't have any beer. He just walked in when I opened the door and sank onto the couch, burying his face in his hands. I sat with him in the dim light of my living room, the only sound his ragged breathing. This was a new level of vulnerability, a new depth of despair. I ached to reach out, to put a hand on his shoulder, but I was frozen by a fear that felt older than time itself. I hate this job, he whispered into his hands, his voice thick. The confession was a bombshell. He had always spoken of it with a kind of grim duty, but never with hatred. What happened? I asked softly. He looked up, and his eyes were glistening. It was like seeing a mountain weep. A kid. Domestic call. The kind of thing you see, and you can't unsee. He shook his head, a violent, angry motion. You spend all your time trying to hold back the tide, but you're just one guy with a bucket. The ocean always wins. He looked so broken, so utterly defeated. The strong, confident man who patrolled the city streets was gone. In his place was just Marcus, drowning. And in that moment, all my fear, all my carefully constructed walls, they just evaporated. They were meaningless in the face of his pain. I moved from my chair to the couch, sitting beside him. The space between us hummed with a terrible, beautiful energy. I still didn't touch him, but I was there. I was close. You're not just one guy with a bucket, I said, the words feeling clumsy but necessary. Sometimes you're the lighthouse, the one thing that shows people there's a shore. He turned his head to look at me. The candlelight danced in his wet eyes. My heart was a frantic drum against my ribs. The air was so thick, I could barely draw breath. This was it, a precipice. Why are you so good to me, Leo? He asked, his voice a raw whisper. And the truth, the terrifying, liberating truth, just fell out of me. Because when I look at you, I started, my own voice trembling, I don't just see a cop. I see a man who is trying so hard to hold the world together. And I think I'm falling in love with him. The words hung in the air between us. Irrevocable. I had just thrown myself off the cliff. I braced for the impact, for the rejection, for the look of disgust or pity. I closed my eyes. I felt his hand, warm and callous, cut my jaw. My eyes snapped open. He was leaning closer, his expression one of wonder, of confusion, of dawning realization. Leo, he breathed, and it was a question and a statement all at once. And then he closed the distance. The first kiss wasn't frantic or passionate. It was slow, hesitant. It was a question. His lips were soft, questioning against mine. It was a discovery, a mapping of new territory for both of us. I could taste the salt of his tears, the faint bitterness of cheap coffee. I could feel the slight tremble in his hand as he held my face. I responded, letting all the unspoken longing of the past months pour into that one simple touch. I brought my hand up to cover his, pressing his palm tighter against my skin. It was an anchor. He was an anchor. He pulled back slightly, just enough to look at me, his forehead resting against mine. His hazel eyes searched my face, looking for something. Reassurance. Permission. I don't know what this is, he whispered, his voice shaking. I've never. With a guy, it's okay. I whispered back. Me neither. Not like this. And then he kissed me again, and this time there was no hesitation. It was a kiss of desperate relief, of finding a safe harbor in the middle of a lifelong storm. It was the moment my quiet, ordered world shattered into a million beautiful, chaotic pieces. And I knew, with a certainty that settled deep in my bones, that I would never want to put it back together again. The morning after was a study in silence. A different kind of silence. Not the comfortable quiet of our evenings, nor the awkward tension of our first meeting. This was a brittle, fragile silence, stretched thin and threatening to snap. I woke up first. The early morning light streamed through the blinds, striping the floor with pale gold. Marcus was still asleep on the couch. Sometime in the night, after the kisses had deepened and the confessions had turned into hushed touches, he had retreated there. A silent, mutual agreement that we had gone far enough for one night. He looked younger in his sleep. The hard lines of his face were gone. His mouth was soft. One arm was flung over his head, the other resting on his chest, rising and falling with each steady breath. He was beautiful, a painful, aching kind of beautiful. My heart swelled with a feeling so fierce and tender it stole my breath. And right behind it, cold and sharp, came the fear. What have I done? The thought was a jolt of ice water. This was Marcus Thorne, Officer Thorne, a man who lived in a world of black and white, of rules and regulations. A man who had whispered, I had pushed him. He was vulnerable, broken, and I had taken advantage. The narrative my anxiety spun was vicious and immediate. He was just looking for comfort, any comfort, and I had misinterpreted it. I had twisted his moment of weakness into something it wasn't. I slipped out of bed, my movements unnaturally quiet, a thief in my own home. I needed coffee. I needed to do something normal. By the time the coffee was brewing, he was awake. I heard the couch creak. I kept my back to him, focusing on pouring water into the French press, my hands shaking so badly I almost scalded myself. Morning, he said. His voice was gravelly, strained. Morning, I replied, not turning around. I couldn't look at him. I was terrified of what I would see in his eyes. Regret, disgust. The silence stretched. It was a physical weight pressing down on my shoulders, making it hard to breathe. I could feel him standing in the doorway of the kitchen. I could feel his gaze on my back. Say something. Anything. Please. I should go, he said. The words were a punch to the gut. Of course. He was running. I had broken him, and now he was running. My stomach filled with a swarm of angry bees. Okay, I managed to choke out, still staring at the coffee maker as if it held all the secrets of the universe. I heard his footsteps as he gathered his things from the living room. The rustle of his uniform. The jingle of his keys. Each sound was a nail in the coffin of the beautiful, fragile thing we had shared last night. He appeared in the kitchen doorway again, now fully dressed. The armor was back, polished and impenetrable. He looked like Officer Thorne again, not Marcus. Thanks, he said, the word clipped, devoid of emotion. For everything, he didn't look at me. He looked at the floor, at the wall, at anything but me. And then he was gone. The front door clicked shut behind him, the sound echoing in the sudden, vast emptiness of my apartment. I stood there for a long time, listening to the silence he left behind. The coffee I had so desperately needed sat on the counter, forgotten. The apartment, which had felt charged and alive with his presence, now felt hollow. A tomb. My solitude returned, but it was different now. It was tainted. Before, it had been a comfortable blanket. Now it was just an absence. The shape of him was imprinted on my couch, on the air itself. Every quiet corner of my apartment screamed his name. The next 2 days were a special kind of hell. A quiet, internal torment. I replayed every moment of that night, every word, every touch, dissecting them until they were meaningless. I was an idiot, a hopeful, romantic idiot. I saw his cruiser in the parking lot. He was home, but our doors remained closed. The hallway was once again a chasm, wider and deeper than ever before. Every time I heard footsteps outside my door, my heart would leap into my throat, a frantic, hopeful traitor. But it was never him. I tried to work. I sat at my drafting table, staring at the half-finished map of a fictional continent. The lines blurred. The names of cities and rivers felt like a foreign language. How could I create worlds for others when my own had just imploded? I was back in my cage, but now I knew what the world outside it felt like. I had tasted freedom, connection, and the silence of my own life was now deafening. On the third night, I gave up. I was sitting in the dark, nursing a glass of whiskey, when I heard the knock. It was soft, hesitant, unmistakable. My heart stopped. Then it started again, a painful, hammering rhythm against my ribs. I didn't move. Maybe if I stayed quiet, he would go away. I could pretend it never happened. I could retreat back into my safe, predictable misery. He knocked again, a little louder this time. "Lau, please. I know you're in there," his voice. It was rough, tired. It held none of the clipped authority from the other morning. It was just Marcus. Slowly, like an old man, I got up and walked to the door. I looked through the peephole. He was standing there, his shoulders slumped, looking down at his feet. He wasn't in uniform. He was wearing jeans and a faded hoodie. He was holding a crumpled paper bag that smelled faintly of pizza. I took a deep breath and opened the door. He looked up, and the relief that flooded his face was so profound it almost knocked me backward. He looked as wrecked as I felt. There were dark circles under his eyes. He hadn't been sleeping either. "Can I come in?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. I just nodded, stepping back to let him pass. He walked into the living room and set the pizza on the coffee table. The same coffee table where he had confessed his pain. The same coffee table that had witnessed our first kiss. He turned to face me, wringing his hands. The big, confident cop was gone again. This was the man from the storm. Lost. Uncertain. "I'm an idiot," he said, the words rushing out. "I am sorry. The way I left. That was cowardly. I panicked. Marcus," I started, but he held up a hand. "No, let me get this out. Please," he took a breath. "I've spent my whole life in these neat little boxes. So, gulp. Good guy. Everything had a label, a rule. And then, you. You don't fit in any of my boxes, Leo. And it terrifies me." He paced my small living room, a caged tiger. What happened between us? It was the most real thing I've felt in, maybe ever. And it scared the hell out of me. Because I liked it. I liked it so much. And I didn't know what to do with that. So I did what I always do when I'm scared. I ran. I put the uniform back on and hid inside it. He stopped in front of me, his hazel eyes pleading. "These last few days, I've been miserable. This quiet in my apartment. It's not like yours. Your quiet is peaceful. Mine is just empty. It's empty without you." My heart felt like it was going to beat its way out of my chest. All the fear, all the anxiety I'd been drowning in, it all just washed away, replaced by a tidal wave of emotion so powerful it made my knees weak. "I thought I'd scared you off," I whispered. "I thought I misread everything." "You didn't misread anything," he said, stepping closer. "You read me better than anyone ever has." He reached out, his hand hovering in the air between us for a second before he gently cupped my cheek. His thumb stroked my skin. "I am scared, Leo. I'm scared of what this means, of what people will think of everything. But I think I'm more scared of losing this. Of losing you." This was it. The clarifying conversation. The moment where we either built a bridge across the chasm or let it swallow us whole. "I'm scared too," I admitted, my voice thick. "But I'm right here." A slow smile spread across his face. The real one. The one that reached his eyes. "Yeah," he breathed. "You are." He leaned in and kissed me. And this kiss was different from all the others. It was a promise. It was a choice. It was a beginning. When he pulled away, he reached into his pocket and pulled out a single key on a plain silver ring. He pressed it into my palm and closed my fingers around it. "It's to my place," he said, his voice steady now, "sure. In case. You know, you ever need anything, or just want to come over. I don't want there to be any locked doors between us anymore. I stared at the key in my hand. It was solid, real, a tangible piece of commitment, a symbolic gesture that spoke louder than any words could. He wasn't just offering me access to his apartment. He was offering me access to his life. I looked up at him, my vision blurring. "Marcus, I want to try, Leo," he said, his voice full of a conviction that settled every last one of my fears. "I want to try this. With you." I didn't need to say anything. I just launched myself at him, wrapping my arms around his neck, burying my face in his shoulder. He caught me, his strong arms encircling me, holding me tight against his solid chest. He felt like home, a home I never knew I was searching for. The new beginning didn't start with a thunderclap, but with the quiet percolating of a coffee pot. My coffee pot on my stove the next morning. I woke up in my own bed, tangled in my own sheets, but I wasn't alone. Marcus was there, a warm, solid presence beside me. His arm was draped over my waist, holding me loosely, even in sleep. The morning light filtered in, soft and forgiving. There was no anxiety, no fear, just a quiet, profound sense of rightness. I slipped out of bed and went to the kitchen. When the coffee was ready, I poured 2 mugs. As I turned, he was there, leaning against the doorframe, a sleepy smile on his face. He was wearing my gray sweatpants again. They were still too short. I found it ridiculously endearing. "Morning," he murmured, his voice thick with sleep. He walked over, took the mug from my hand, and his fingers brushed mine. This time I didn't flinch. I just smiled. He leaned in and kissed me, a slow, lazy morning kiss that tasted of coffee and sleep and a future I was just starting to believe in. Our lives began to merge in small, quiet ways. A toothbrush of his appeared in the holder next to mine. A few of his off-duty clothes found their way into an empty drawer in my dresser. I used the key he gave me one afternoon just to let myself into his apartment and leave a book I thought he'd like on his nightstand. His space was Spartan, neat, but it felt lonely. I hoped in time we could change that. The hallway between 4A and 4B was no longer a chasm. It was just a path. Some nights he stayed at my place, seeking its quiet comfort. Other nights, I stayed at his silent statement that I was willing to meet him in his world, too. We'd eat pizza on his couch, watch stupid action movies, and he'd tell me stories about his childhood, about the reasons he became a cop. He was still a man of few words, but the words he chose to give me were precious. He never stopped being a cop. I never stopped being a quiet, introspective mapmaker. We were still different species, but we learned to navigate each other's landscapes. I learned to understand the silences that followed his hard shifts. He learned to appreciate the comfort of a life lived between the lines. One Saturday, we were curled up on my couch, a lazy afternoon light slanting through the window. I was sketching in my notebook, and he was reading, his head in my lap. His presence was a comforting weight. I looked down at him, at the way the light caught the gold flecks in his eyes, at the scar above his brow, at the relaxed set of his mouth. A wave of pure, unadulterated happiness washed over me. My life had been a map I thought was complete. A small, well-ordered island, safe and predictable. I had charted every river, named every mountain. I thought I knew its borders perfectly. Marcus Thorne wasn't just a disruption. He was an earthquake. He was a tectonic shift that shattered my neat little map, revealing a whole new continent I never knew existed. He was the plot twist I never saw coming, the one that made the whole story make sense. He was loud and complicated and real, and he had crashed into my quiet life and showed me that the walls I'd built to protect myself were also a prison. He didn't just breach my solitude. He liberated me from it. He showed me that the bravest thing you can do isn't drawing new worlds, but daring to live in this one with someone by your side. Have you ever had someone completely upend your world for the better, turning your carefully drawn map into a grand, unpredictable adventure? Let me know in the comments below. And if you enjoyed our story, please don't forget to subscribe for more.